And we can just open up the floor here for people to share.
Yeah, I'll share. I've been thinking a lot this week about kind of the shadow side of tenderness, you might call it. Like lately, and I think this is because I'm just on the cusp of retiring, from my job that I was very invested in for so many years. And I'm like going through all the, for people who don't know me, I was a scientist for many years, or I still am, at least for a little while longer. Going through like all these microscope slide boxes that go back 30 or 40 years and thinking about the people and thinking about the experiments and notebooks and so on and so forth. I have felt this has been a very tender period for me. Um, which is maybe why, like, when I saw the title of this class, I kind of jumped at it too. But but for me, I was asking so there's a lot of sadness or at least poignancy, mixed in. And I was asking myself if that's ever not the case, like is there always sort of this shadow in tenderness? Is that what makes it tender? And I think it might be, but I because even if I think about like looking at a sweet little kitten or something, and I might feel tenderness, but some of that is, oh, how vulnerable they are, or oh, how innocent they are. They don't know about the cruel world out there. Um, so yeah, I just wonder what you think about that.
What a lovely observation. I think, yes, I think something goes hand in hand with tenderness, that we are, as really beings that live contingently based on all of these kinds of things having to go okay, there's a vulnerability just to being alive. And so tenderness is a part of life because life is vulnerable. And, we're kind of immersed in a stream of change constantly. And we have some limited control and ability to predict and prepare. And yet, in something such as retiring, you have this experience of like watching something that was important to you, saying goodbye to something that has been very important to you, and in which you invested a lot of energy. And that is essentially human. And some of the transitions are swifter and rougher than others. You know, I'm now, I'm with my son, who's almost 6 months into being a parent, and and that is a huge transition.
Hmm.
And there are losses, there are gains, there are, and also watching my granddaughter and just how, infants, they move so quickly through hunger, and then they're okay, and then they need to sleep, and they get cranky, and there's just this. And so it's just faster in a certain way. She cycles through faster. And then as we get older, we have a little more like stability in the midst of the flux. We establish ourselves in a career. We establish ourselves in a home and a network of people. And yet, even then, there's this vulnerability that's just woven. It's in the nature of things, really. Some of our friends here in Seattle, because we lived here before, we have friends here, and there's some serious health issues that are cropping up for them. And there's a poignancy to that too. And I don't know that it's always, the flavor of it is always sad. Sad is one flavor, perhaps. Poignance, Poignancy is a little different flavor. Um, but you can kind of feel that quality of being immersed in time where, you know, you can't you can't always know what's around the bend. Even when you know, you can't really know what it's like to retire until you retire, can you? And you can't even anticipate what the process of retiring is going to quite be like, what it's going to be like to say goodbye in the ways that you want to say goodbye. And it seems like it is just right in the core of what we are, what life is. And you're a biologist, life is not immortal. There's some really long-lived things out there in the universe. Human beings aren't really one of them, but they're.
And it struck me that in part because it has that like tenderness, that there's love in it, but because in part because it has this shadow side, there's a fullness to it, almost like
Yes,
a fullness.
I like that word. It has a fullness to it. And there's a need to be tender,
Mm.
you know. And there's a witnessing aspect, I think, to tenderness. As you witness yourself going through these changes and you witness other people going through these changes, there's something that touches the heart in that.
And interestingly, the random pairing put me with someone who had just retired 3 weeks ago.
Interesting. Yeah, you can compare notes.
For 50 seconds, but yeah.
50 seconds, yes.
All right. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome.
Okay, this is just a thought that flashed for me right then when you all were talking, and it very much has to do with tenderness. Um, I went to the funeral of a brother-in-law, um, and kind of a premature funeral. He was not even 60, and expected not to live terribly long. But anyway, it was a very, I had a very strange relationship with him. I met him as I met him when he was at a particularly down part of his life, as he had been much of his life. Was a terrible crack addict, um, and just right in the middle, I met him. I was at my parents', and I had to tell him not to call there anymore. And anyway, that was quite a long while ago. And through the years, he lived not in Massachusetts, but in Texas. So I didn't see him that often. He was married to one of my sisters, and terrible stories about his behaviors. But I did get to see, I saw him when he was a little better towards the end of his life. Not great. He was also abusive. However, at his funeral, which was uh, in the rain, under a tent, very cold, a few people, his family that I didn't know, a very different, different than how I was raised. This family, he had had tragedies in his life. But anyway, I went to the funeral for my sister's sake mainly, but just because I was very sad about him. And it was kind of a open, you could speak. And it was a fairly small group. And my sister wanted to speak, and she did. And then someone else spoke. And it just came to me that I wanted to say something about him, that because I had something a very, very strong image of him. And it wasn't all the drugs and the chaos. It was a time when I walked kind of unannounced into my sister's living room, and he had it was my other sister's living room, so I didn't expect him there, but he had in his arms about 4 or 5 little chihuahuas. And I knew he loved dogs. I had met him or heard of him for the first time around a dog he and my sister had found and rescued in the middle of chaos and drugs. But I saw him, and that was this picture. And it was probably 5 years before he died that I walked in and saw him with these little doggies. And he was a large person, big, large arms. And these little dogs were just all over his arms. And I saw him with these dogs like that. And I was just like, I loved it. It was so tender. And I just wanted to stand up and say, I know so and so's had a lot of, he's had a lot of tragedy, he's had a hard life, but I just want to give an image of what I had, what I saw once that just is with me right now. That's what's with me. And uh, at this time, and it was a very difficult time for his family. So anyway, thank you for the topic. I love the topic, and thank you for the conversation about that.
Thank you for the image you gave us of your brother-in-law holding these Chihuahua puppies. So tender. Yeah. And how, human beings are complex. There are many different sides to all of us. And sometimes we can get fixated on certain aspects of people and miss some of the other aspects. So it's lovely how you lifted that up at your brother-in-law's funeral. So thank you. Sometimes it's really hard to see. Sometimes people go out of their way not to show it, to try to present a side that looks invulnerable and looks like it can't be touched, But there it is. So who else would like to speak? Lynn.
Today I was going to go hiking on the mountain. And I just realized I was sort of all rattled, I think, from the conditions of the world. And I decided instead to go walk by the Connecticut River. There's a beautiful place to walk in Hadley for those who are in Western Mass. And I don't usually walk there because it's so flat. But it just has such a wide and beautiful view of the water. And it was just a time for me to really notice, how meditation has allowed me to invite myself to settle and slow in order to fully notice whatever, I'm observing. And in this case, it was that beautiful wide view of the Connecticut River, which I have lots of opportunities to see and have seen many times. And it's that awareness that, things are always changing and life is always moving, and there's really no better metaphor for it than the river. And there was the current, there really wasn't a lot of wind, and the current was moving down the middle of it in, rather a small swath of the river. And then to the sides of it is all of this other action and texture. And I just became really immersed with, why is the current shaped that way? What is exactly happening with no wind? It's happening in the water itself. It's happening in the body of maybe the plants, the curves, the little, permutations of the shoreline that I couldn't even see. And it just struck me, it was just a beautiful moment of how beautiful life is and nature, and how grounding water is, as part of our souls and our world. And was just so appreciative that I'd gone and looked at the river and just settled myself, and just appreciative for the practice that sort of allows me, even for a small moment, when life is sort of roller coastering, at least me emotionally now, that it is just nice to know that they can have a small space where there's less constant thought and the ability to appreciate the moment.
All right, thank you. I think I said at the first class that my understanding of tenderness is that, like, the ability to let life touch you, And so there's a way that we let things that are outside come in and touch us, and like a river, like the sunlight on a river, or the current. And we're so constructed that we really are not separate from our environments, and our environments come inside us. So, your time on the river was that. It was letting the river touch you. I think it's really important at this time, particularly for people who are paying attention to the news, to give their brains and their hearts a breather, and to feel I'm not sure what the word is I'm looking for. The earth is not eternal, but there's some way that the elements here, the elements we live with, especially water, but also air and earth, they continue, they abide, and it's nourishing in some way to touch them. So all those things kind of occurred to me as I was listening to your share. So thank you, Lynn.
So one reason I was interested in this tenderness class was because the world is just so difficult now. And, I read about 5 newspapers a day and watch all kinds of news. And it's so hard to be with the level of cruelty, vengeance, meanness, suffering, war, all those things. And I realized last week when you were talking about your final meltdown, for what want of a better word, and then the words you said about maybe you came to feel that people needed to perhaps molt and find a new way, new structures, and so on and so forth. And it reminded me, this is not quite the same, but that I read a lot of books, and I read a book and I just jotted down the words from it, but now I don't remember the author, and it was Soften into Reality. And so I think about that a lot, because there's that balance between not wanting to ignore everything that's going on and yet not wanting to be in total despair.
Yes.
And that there is an importance, however, of of softening into reality. And I've been thinking a little bit about ways to do that. And I think one is the breath and being in nature. And I think acts of kindness, and love, although that's a very overused word. But in a sense, if we're to take action of any type in this world, or if we feel we have love, then we need to take actions, even if they're just very small. So that's where my thoughts have been lately. And
Right. Yeah.
try to remember that, to soften into reality instead of getting all tensed up and
Yes.
distraught, which is very hard not to do.
It's challenging not to do that. And I love that phrase, soften into reality. Yeah.
Yes, I wish now I could attribute it, but at the time I wrote 3 sentences down from something I was reading, and I just thought, oh, that's important, but I didn't write down the author.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I think the mind is a perfect communism, actually.
Yeah.
We can share everything we own and no one's the poorer for it. So,
Right. Yeah, I'm not
yeah.
claiming it.
And like, as cruel as the world is cruel because of the hardening of people's hearts in various ways. And so I think it's a radical act. I think it's a kind of revolutionary act to try to live with a soft heart in this world. And it doesn't mean that there aren't times to be strong, to be vocal, to do all of those sorts of things. But I do think there's a need for the softness of the heart.
Something else I was reading at the same time, another little phrase on that card is drop into your heart again and again, or place your mind in the heart again and again, something like that.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. So they kind of tie together, really.
They do. Yeah. Whoever you're reading is kind of on the same line of thought that I'm following. Yeah. So thank you, Linda. Yeah. And, I always, 5 newspapers is a lot, I think. And so you'll need a lot of counterbalance, really. I'm currently reading a book that was just published by a friend of mine, Rebecca Bradshaw, on the Dharma. I can't recall the name, the title, Down to Earth Dharma, I think it's called. And she referred to a practice that she does when she feels like her heart is getting kind of hard. She's getting kind of rigid. Is she tries to look deeply at flowers 10 times a day. I suppose this works better seasonally than it does in the wintertime, unless you manage to stock your house with flowers in the wintertime. But there's something about just actually observing a flower. There's a delicacy to them. There's a beauty. There's, the petals themselves, they're kind of moist and tender. They are kind of they're something that touches us. It's easy for the heart to be touched by them. So that's all I'll say, is that with all of that informing yourself, be sure to provide some counterbalancing influence for your heart. I actually think that it doesn't have to be a flower. I think leaves are pretty amazing too. And bark. Almost anything in the natural world has a complexity about it when you really look. when you really see what's there, there's a complexity and a beauty about it. So
A question, I guess, about feeling too much.
mhm.
You know, like I can't even look at the news actually. It's not even about the news. It's more my personal situation and my family and how it affects me. And so the other night my husband was like, why don't you just try not feeling for a week? See what that does. Like the compassion is driving you over the edge.
Yeah.
Just try to just compartmentalize it a little. Like, so I just try some moments in the day to be like, wait, I'm actually okay. Like, I'm just taking on so much suffering of other people that is destroying me.
Mhm.
So is there just a way to just like, okay, I notice that I'm being like dragged through the mud and just going along like a dog without its leash or whatever, you know, just I'm just like I'm
Yeah.
doing this and I'm feeling so deeply. What if I could just like watch it from a distance a little more or something?
Great. I think, in the Buddhist tradition, compassion needs to be balanced. There are 4 Brahma Viharas. You may be familiar with this teaching, but I'll just go over them
I
for
have the
you.
Brahma Viharas as a practice, right?
There's loving kindness, there's sympathetic joy, there's
Yeah.
compassion, and there's equanimity.
Yeah.
And what those 4 things do is I think that they balance us out in certain ways. And so there are times when loving kindness is sufficient, that you don't need to let your heart like go like this towards somebody. You can simply, may you be well, feel goodwill, which is it's a much more moderate kind of response than really letting their suffering in all the time. It can be just, may you be well. It's not necessarily closing off the heart. Sometimes we can become blended with parts of us that are what's the word I'm looking for? We're identifying with other people's suffering, and it's not necessarily compassion the way in the fullest sense. We're just identified with their suffering. We're horrified that that might be happening to another being because we wouldn't want that to happen to us. There's something there that's not the best boundaries. So that may be happening to some degree here, especially where it's your children that are affecting you. It's very hard to have good
Yeah, I don't
boundaries
know that
with that.
I was kind of like, I don't think mothers can actually do that. Like
I'm
that's
not
like
sure they can
part of my
either.
heart that's walking around.
Exactly. I'm
I
not sure
don't
they
think I
can
can not
either.
suffer by watching the child suffer.
But sometimes try it
Mm.
and try like wishing them well and try saying, I believe you have the strength to walk through this, to find your way through this. And I know it's hard. It's one of the hardest things is to watch your child suffer. It's really profoundly difficult. And my heart goes out to people whose children grow older and they get into more and more trouble. And the trouble becomes more and more serious in certain ways, and there must be tremendous suffering there. And yet, like, what do we reach for that has peace in it around that? What's the peace that can be found in your child's struggles? I don't really have a complete answer for this. One of the things I find helpful is to not think that I know that this is bad for them. When my mind puts a framework around it, like this is really unfortunate, this is harming them, this is bad, I'm not necessarily always seeing things the way they are. So, I mean, classically in Buddhism, the meditation that goes with equanimity is to reflect on how each being is, receives the karma that is their true property. I've never found that all that helpful, to tell you the truth, as
I
a
think it
thought.
is helpful at a certain point to
Um,
be like, okay, this is, I'm here to like burn off some serious karma right now. And so
yeah.
so are
And
the
other beings are too. I mean, that's where sometimes you need to land, is you don't really know in the mystery of beings why, for instance, people go through such horrific events, some of which don't seem to have any influence over at all. It's the nature of the world. And I have a part of me that remains agnostic about karma in that sense. I don't want to see all that as, this is the working out of their past actions, because I'm not convinced that's true. And there's something that I feel can create indifference in that kind of perspective. But what I can find my way into more easily is, I don't really know. When I look back at my own life and I look at some of the suffering that I've been through, I can't honestly say that that was unnecessary or useless, unfair, or all those sorts of words that we often apply to other people's suffering. When I look back at my own, it seems easier to do this with my own, to see that I went through that, and that has made me a different person. And that has actually made me a resource in some cases for other people who have suffered the same way. It's created a different sort of compassion. And so I feel like what's more available to me as an equanimity practice, which is kind of what you're asking for, I think, is what is the equanimity to balance your compassion, is something along the lines of kind of not knowing, being able to be present with another's suffering without necessarily identifying with it. I'm trying to, the most recent example that comes to mind is riding home in the car with Lucy. Okay, Lucy is 6 months old, and she doesn't in general like a car seat. And we were at the zoo today, and on the way over, she was fine because she'd just gotten up from a nap, and she was fed, and everything was just peachy. On the way back, she was also fed with a bottle, and but she was clearly in much more fragile state, and started crying, And so I was in the back seat with her, and for a while I was trying to do my little song and dance routine, and it came to a point where I really couldn't comfort her. And you know what it's like to be with a crying baby, and if it's your crying baby, it's different, And kind of, I'm the grandfather, I'm not the mother, I'm not the father, but it affects me, I think, in a deeper way than just any baby. But there's something about that cry that is hard. It's hard. And so to be present with her, I just try to keep my heart open. And I don't feel like I suffered that much. But I don't feel like I had to close my heart either. There's a middle path there where you don't have to become insensitive, and you're aware of someone else's pain, but you just send them goodwill, and you do what you can I had Panda dancing, hanging off the bar over her car seat, dangling, trying to do everything I could to entertain her and distract her. But at a certain point, it didn't work. And so they're suffering. So see if you can find that path. And I just find goodwill to be often that path. It's not, if you kind of tend to go a bit overboard with compassion, like there may be some kind of getting stuck there. And so a little distance and just, presence with your heart open is different than feeling so much with them, feeling with them.
Thanks.
Hopefully that's helpful. Let me know if that's helpful. Okay.